Hello, I am coming to you today to talk about science communication, a very big topic. There's so many ways to come at this, and I'm guessing at this point in the term, you're kind of also feeling that this has a lot of different complex pieces to it. So to narrow it this week, we're talking about dialogue instead of monologuing, and how we come at conversations about science, technology, whatever it is, that we're coming at it through this lens of understanding, obstacles that we face for listening, whether we are the expert or the non-expert in a dialogue, or if we're coming at it as two experts, dueling experts, which is a whole other field of science communication, the dueling experts. However, I'm going to really focus on, for this week, on this idea of relating, which lines up with our chapter we're reading in The Heart of Science Communication by Faith Cairns, that we want to think about what are all the elements of a conversation when we're talking about really complex topics? What happens when emotions are starting to come up? Uh, and the difference between informative speaking versus persuasive speaking, really getting clear on how we empower ourselves and the other in a true dialogue. And so these, boy, that's a lot of things. I hope I can get all that to you. But that's my goal for this little tiny desk lecture for our science communication class. So, just starting off here, one of the things we really want to go at right away is the importance of effective science communication, right? So when we talk about the idea of being effective, it means that we are reaching our goal, that the message we want to send is that we are effective in sending that message to a receiver who can then interpret meaning and our intent and our what our goals are all being met. That's really the idea of being effective in communication. We also want to think about the challenges with that, and being appropriate and being appropriate to culture, being appropriate to the person that you are talking to, whether it's an intercultural encounter or understanding that you're entering a dialogue and you shouldn't be in a monologue or a preaching, or even teaching kind of mode if you are really in dialogue. Uh, and then the challenges of complex ideas. We are going to talk a little bit about that and bridging the gap. So, when we talk about, which is a lot of the focus of this lecture, is expert to non-expert. Who our non-expert is doesn't mean that they don't have expertise. We want to be clear that the expertise of coming at it is going to be narrow to the expertise of the information we're trying to convey from the scientific point of view. Now, as a non-expert, maybe you are going to report that out like a journalist does, or you might get information from a podcast or from one of the classes you're studying in. You want to report it. You could take the journalist role and go, they said, or some say, like we have to be careful how we report the science and really get more credible into who said it, what was the research, and like try and move away from these kind of generalizations because that's when people often feel exhausted or they build barriers to listening because who's they or some believe or like these kind of really general pre-statements we put before our thing, the responsibility of reporting, if it's not our research or our experience, that we have to really qualify that and say the actual source. That is one of the responsibilities of journalism when we're reporting ideas, even if it's ideas we agree with or don't agree with. We want to be sure that we are sourcing it accurately and putting the ownership of it. I think that's a really important distinction when we talk about uh, really conveying an idea, especially if we feel really strongly about getting that information out for whatever reason, that we are honoring where the information comes from. So that is also a step when we get to this idea of the barriers to effective communication is part of this. Where is the source? Who is the source? And being transparent about sources. So when we emphasize dialogue over monologue, which is what relating in science communication is about, is that we want to engage our audience in conversation. And I'm using the word audience, but I'm not really talking about public speaking per se. It does include that, but the audience is really the receiver of the information. And in an interpersonal or a small group setting, our audience becomes the listener. And when we are emphasizing dialogue over monologue, we also have to be the audience. We aren't just the sender, and there's not just a receiver, but we want to also be a receiver as a part of a communication transactional, making it transactional, and that there is two ways to the information. So, engaging your listener or your audience in conversation is to understand that the person you're talking to has a perspective, and that if we don't know that perspective, if we don't know what information they're already coming into with, even if it's misinformation or if it's a scientific idea that we have now disproven or we have better information about, that we need to know where we're starting. That means that each of us needs to have a holistic view of the other. Now, often in our urgency or in the busyness of life, do we have time to go through this whole ramping up into the information that we have? Often we don't. And this is one of the barriers to being effective in communication, that people coming in with the fast paced need of, I don't have time for this, or I only have your attention, and the distractions are abound, that we often will use shortcuts. And those shortcuts are the stereotypes that we're engaging with, to speed things along. So we have our expert and all the stereotypes about science or scientist, and oh gosh, here you come with a new fact or some statistic, and we like lock into our stereotype, and we get a barrier of dismissiveness and not really understanding the full aspects. So our listeners have a lot of stereotypes about scientists, or scientific information or statistics or facts or reasoning, these kind of things, the logos piece of the message and the ethos piece of the message and the emotions. Oh my gosh, I'd love to talk about this, but anytime I talk about it, people get all riled up and they're too passionate about the topic, and I can't match that your passion. So, like understanding all those pieces, it's complicated. That we often are dealing with a listener who's using stereotypes, and they become defensive in the listening process. So as soon as someone moves into a defensive place, or they just shut down into stonewalling, that we aren't really in a dialogue anymore. And this is often why we end up, our scientists or the expert often ends up in a flooded place of really like, hey, I'm trying to really build something with you, but you're not dialoguing with me. And we need to kind of unpack or unwrap that defensive piece. And that takes time. And that means that we are now relating and becoming empathetic and trying to understand different perspectives other than our own. And that doesn't mean that we need to put away, I've got the facts, right? I've got undisputable data. We don't want to put that completely away, but we do want to build ourselves up to a place where we are really in a dialogue and a relationship. And that's what this approach to scientific information is looking at. So, the expert and the non-expert, how do you engage in openness to new information and new perspectives? Because we do fall into those stereotypes. We fall into stereotypes about the listener, the non-expert. Oh, you're just a politician, or you're a lawyer, and you're a, you've been on TikTok too much, and blah, blah, whatever it is that we've decided about the non-expert audience. There is, the stereotypes are coming at it, can come at it that way. And we should become aware of how those stereotypes are affecting a true dialogue, and being more effective. So we need to kind of understand the psychological noise or the defensive listening aspects that often happen in a productive dialogue. So this is just a note about psychological noise. So in a transaction, in an interpersonal interaction, in a transactional conversation, the sender and receiver are sending messages through different channels. There's the linguistic channel, and then there's a lot of nonverbal channels, from the tone of our voice to the speed of the rate, tone, the way we articulate, pronounce things, mispronounce things, which guilty, and then our nonverbals of our gestures and eye contact or not eye contact, facial expression. Like, okay, so the channels for nonverbals, I do teach nonverbal communication in the COMM department, and we spend 10 weeks just on nonverbal channels. There's so many of them. So that means that we need to kind of be aware that when we're sending messages through channels, the receiver is interpreting things through multiple channels, as well as how we're sending them, and that there's noise. The noise is what's interrupting a message from being sent or being received. There's physical noise in the environment, from being in a restaurant or a coffee shop setting, to talking at a concert or where music is playing out loud, like how physical noise in the environment. Then there is physiological noise, and physiological noise is the functioning of our bodies. So anything with aspects of health that are becoming a distraction or interrupting our attention so that we aren't fully able to engage in. So this would be like pain or being hungry or anything with the functioning of the body. And then there's psychological noise. And psychological noise is our thinking process. And this is where we are focusing for this lecture, of how psychological noise, like those stereotypes, our expectations, how do we move into a defensive place, or we need to think about our identity, and we get into this identity repair instead of the actual topic we want to talk about. Why am I all of a sudden trying to give you my resume, so that we can get to this information, right? These are different things that are psychological noise, that turn into a kind of defensive listening stance, a defensive listening stance. So when people are in defensiveness, we know that listening shuts down. We input and openness to getting information is almost non-existent. Excuse me. I must have got some emotion in my voice going over all that psychological noise. Okay. Let me calm down. I do look a little flushed. Okay. So let's get back on track. So when someone is in a defensive listening pose, different habits start happening. One is they move into an attack on the source, on the ethos of the message. That can turn into an attack on you as the reporter. Hey, I'm just telling you what I heard. I don't know why you're going after me, right? But it doesn't matter. If you're reporting it, then somehow you can be part of the attack in a defensive listening place, especially when someone feels like the information is challenging their belief structures. Uh, or their values, and sometimes this is why we feel frustrated because it gets up into belief structures, our values, which is different than the logos or the statistical fact, evidential based information we're trying to convey. So defensive listening will often show up as attack the source and attack its credibility, attack you as the reporter or you as the expert in the information. And and it can be relentless, right? We see with social media platforms and the piling on of cancel culture that we can get really deeply into this. Uh, we can get like an overwhelming attack of the source or attacking the information itself. Well, okay, I'm not attacking you, but I will attack your information. And then it becomes into this kind of dueling piece of, or you get total pushback and that would be like this polarization of, oh, I'm not going to even listen to that. I already have my mind made up. I already know the facts, and I know what you're spewing is lies, lies, lies. And when you get a wall like that, you are no longer in a dialogue, right? These are things that are really not um, really a dialogue about scientific principles or evidential base or the research that's involved. You are just get a wall. And these are really frustrating things when they show up. Uh, but you can't really force someone to listen. You can't force someone to change their mind, especially if they're really tied up in their identity, in their position. And so we want to think about how these impact the ability to learn, the ability to collaborate, the ability to build effective policy that could really make a difference in the well-being of public health or societal impacts on society and lifestyles, right? So we want to think about uh, that we are dealing with sometimes psychological noise or defensive listening, and these are barriers to effective communication. Do I have the answer? No, I don't always have the answer, but I will make an attempt to talk about what functional and establishing a productive dialogue. So we want to do functional communication or productive dialogues, and what are the pathways to that? If someone doesn't want to participate in that, then someone doesn't want to participate in that. There's not a lot we can do to be open, to allow someone to be open. But maybe it's good to spend time understanding what's really going on with that from a psychological point of view so that we can really move into that productive dialogue. So let's talk about that productive dialogue and setting conversation. One of the first things we want to do is setting conversation norms and procedures to dialogue. And this really depends on how much is the other person showing up in like, no, I need to understand this, or, hmm, I don't know if I really need to know this. Like, where is the expert to the non-expert? Where are the things? How are they showing up? But if we say both people want to move into a dialogue or a conversation, then we want to establish norms. Now, norms can be really simple things like just saying, this is a really contentious issue and let's move slowly through it. Let's really take some time with it. Let's make sure before we move from point to point that we really understand each other's point of view. Like you could just say something really like that and get agreement on the way the dialogue's going to go. Or you could just agree, hey, we're just going to talk about this one thing. Or I really want to cover these 3 points and we only have a finite amount of time. Let's track that and make sure we cover every point before we walk away today, if it's possible. And you know, when you do, you spend time at the beginning of going into a dialogue, kind of setting up your expectation and setting up your own accountability. Hey, sometimes I get really excited about this. You need to call me out on it and say, hey, you've lost me. And because sometimes when I get going, I need someone to interrupt me. And saying it's creating accountability for your own conversational style, creating a structure or agreed on talking points. And then if we do get hijacked into a tangent or get hijacked into feeling like we're defensive all of a sudden, then we can be allowing for a reminder to stay on point and putting a pin in those other things. Not to say they're not important, but like, hey, remember we agreed to talk about XYZ and now we're on LMLK. Sorry, I'm trying to do alphabet as an example, but so you get like, hey, I get that's important and I want to come back to it, but we did agree to just talk about this today. Can we get back onto that? And allowing for those meta communication statements is one way to deal with um, time, uh, defensiveness, or not defensiveness. That's not the word I want to use. More con points of that might feel controversial. Uh, and then we want to structure the dialogue, create some structure for the dialogue. Uh, when we're listening in difficult discussions, we want techniques for our listening. Like you can really only take care of yourself. You can't ask someone else to take care of how they're showing up as a listener, but you should be able to take care of yourself as a listener and knowing what things get your emotions riled up. You might run into something that surprised you that you didn't know that you were going to get defensive about or start moving into a tangent. But if you're in a learning mind about yourself as a listener, then should be trying to unwrap that and learn yourself so that you can get better and better. And that means you need to manage yourself when you get those things that show up that hijack you, where you feel it more emotionally flooded, whether it's frustration or it's anger, whatever those things are, you want to know how to de-escalate yourself. There are tools for de-escalating the conversation, but also de-escalating yourself becomes really important. Okay, I'm gonna just pause for a second. Give me 1 second. Okay, I just had to pause for a second to get some water. My throat just feels a little, maybe it's the change in the weather. So we'll see how we do here. I'll just keep going. So where was I? Okay, techniques for active listening. That's right. And managing emotions during conflict. So you want to learn how to regulate your own emotions, learning what gets you out of your focus. Because when we're in a hijacking, what's really happening with the neuroscience, and I'm not an expert on this, but we move from our frontal reasoning parts of our brain and we move into the amygdala part and we get into this fight or flight or freeze kind of situation. And what are those things that move you really quickly into flight, for freeze, or which things can keep you back, keep you into the reasoning mind? You have a steady breathing, you're open to listening and really understanding. And when we talk about listening, let's see, I'm just going to see in my notes here. We'll talk a bit about effective listening skills as we get later on in the lecture, but this is a really important thing to when things get difficult, do you need to do you know how to step away and take a break? Do you have that ability? Uh, do you have someone, a friend you can call or go for a walk? Whatever it is, listen to some music, get your mind back into the reasoning place where you can be calm and dialogue again. And you can't force the other person to do that, but you can take care of yourself, and that's really important. At this point, I want to talk a bit about how we are coming at a conversation uh, as informing versus persuading. So we live in an environment where we are constantly being asked to persuade us, to change our minds, to believe this or believe that, or buy this or buy that, or vote for this or vote for that. And because we're constantly being bombarded, like bombarded. Like we are in soup up to here of persuasive messages that when we move into an actual dialogue or a conversation, we want to think about the difference between how are we coming across? Do we have information or are we really trying to persuade? And there's a fine line before that because informing has a has sprinkles of persuasion in it because it's really just persuading you that this information is important for you to know, right? It's not like where we're in persuading of if we have the toggle of on the spectrum, when we're full on persuading, we're moving to motivating and getting someone into a place of action of spend your money, vote for this, uh, do this with your time, volunteer, whatever it is, right? That we want action. And then we move through the spectrum of maybe we just want to persuade someone to consider that this information is important to know to getting to I have information to share. Um, so this informing versus persuading, distinguishing between those things, uh, what is actually happening in a conversation or a dialogue is really the next important piece. So, if we don't we need to this is why relating in science communication is so important because you kind of need to know where the other person is at. You need to jump into that listener. Oh yeah, like what do you know about this topic? What is that person's perspective? Where are they coming from is really going to change how you come at the conversation. Because if you start from the very beginning with a very good place to start. But if you're starting with ABC and they're really at, RST, you are going to lose them really fast. They're going to feel like you're condescending or patronizing. I already know ABC. Why are you starting way over there? So this is why a dialogue and relating and getting to know someone as a whole person means you can jump into the conversation as an expert where the information is needed. And also, if you ask someone, if you're the expert and you're asking someone to describe what they already know, you're going to get a better idea of how much, uh, if they, what is, what they're coming with that is, yes, that's right, or, I'm not sure how you're saying this because uh, we have new evidential proof about that fact that one might be outdated, or that sounds like misinformation. Let's clear that up, right? You want, if you hear the narrative coming from the non-expert, now you have a better idea of how to unwrap what you're bringing to the conversation to get straight to that point, um, and be in dialogue, right? So we want to incorporate, we don't want an over reliance. Okay, some of the things that you need to think about as an expert and informing. Sometimes when expert gets really frustrated, they just move really straight into the facts and statistics and, oh, I've got this and I've got this and I've got this proof and I've got this and here's this research study, right? Like, and that over reliance on logos as a way to convey the message often shuts down listeners as well. And it's not to say that's not important, but as Aristotle says, we need to observe all the available means of persuasion. And so if we have an over reliance of logos, we need to understand that we're incorporating ethos in our communication. Ethos meaning the credibility or the competency level uh, of everyone involved in the dialogue. We need to understand our audience's prior knowledge, or where are they working from coming in. And then we can build our relationship through we can build the relationship through relating, of understanding each other first, establishing trustworthiness through the dialogue. And trustworthiness is how we show up as a listener. It's how we show up to be non-defensive, to not just declare our confirmation biases or our dismissiveness of each other, right? Which we cannot guarantee someone else is going to do it, but we can always show up with our own ethical core value standard of how we establish our trustworthiness through dialogue. Another important thing, while I'm still on informing versus persuading, and then I'm going to jump into the role of rhetoric in science communication, but when we come into the information, we want to think about this idea of our propositions of information. So a proposition is a statement that we make that leads into what we're going to unravel. And when we're informing, we're really we have to hear how we're building information as either statements of fact, statements of value, or statements of policy. And how we build these things, and policy really being those action statements that really start tipping us into persuasiveness, that we want to not create we want to create pathways with our propositions and move through them through dialogue. So a proposition of fact is when we are making a statement of truths, what is true and what is false. Now, if someone just says you make a proposition of truth based on evidential proof, and you have a fact based on that, and we covered defensiveness and attacking. There's not a lot you can do, right? So I want to move back to that productive dialogue. And when we make a proposition of fact, it should be something that we want to make a place of understanding and a good place of agreement. So if I say a proposition of fact that when I go to the store and I'm in the aisle with all the breakfast cereals, I notice that some of the cereals are in bags in the aisle, and some are in boxes. There's box cereal and bag cereal. There's also some in bulk cereal in the bulk aisle, right? So there's bag cereal, box cereal, and bulk cereal. That's a proposition of fact. Now, if I were to try and prove a proposition of fact, I'd have to go to the store, take a lot of pictures, go to store after store and keep proving it true, 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 true for it to get even close to being a fact, right? That is one of the things that science experts in science communication kind of lean in here as an over reliance because of evidential proof. That we want to build up, that maybe we can just agree on the facts, right? Another example would be a proposition of value. A proposition of value is so hard to persuade. Oh, this one is where we are saying cereal that comes in boxes tastes better than cereal that comes in a bag, right? There's this tastes better than this. So a value statement, a values, we want to think of as better than or worse than, and putting things on a hierarchy. And as soon as I come at it that this is better than or this is less than, that's a statement of value. And that means that we are trying to discuss the importance or the worth of something. Now, if I tell you this tastes better than this, if this pizza tastes better, this brick, this person's pizza tastes better than this person's, but that's very subjective. That is, how can I persuade that? Well, we do try and persuade that, and we do that through identity. So when you're being persuaded through value, there's usually a branding that happens and a identity that forms around that to create the value of it. And then when we want to match our identity into that other identity, we want to be a part of that brand. And this is how proposition of value is often persuaded to you through in social media. It's going to be through influencers. It's going to be uh, if I'm trying to persuade you to vote for this or to buy this or to agree with me on this, I'm going to relate the ethos of that information to the brand. And this is when we see celebrities or influencers, as I already said, or things like that showing up as a brand, and then we're more willing to accept or be persuaded by a proposition of value. And that's a strong reliance on ethos, right? So proposition of fact has a strong reliance on logos. Propositions of value have a strong reliance on ethos. And the last one, the policy. Policy is advocating for a special action, a call to action, right? And the action could be to continue the conversation at let's keep working on this, that we still want to collaborate. That could be the call to action to a call to action to buy or vote. You should buy box cereal, or you should buy bag cereal or bulk cereal. If I wanted to do a proposition of bag cereal is better than box cereal, I'm going to come at it with the facts of bag cereal uses less packaging. Bag cereal is made by in the same factory as the box cereal. If I go through the ingredients, right, like I'm going to go through it, the logos, but then I'm going to create this value of uh, celebrity. This celebrity loves the taste of bag cereal. It's their preference. And I'm going to show you this celebrity buying and using this product, and then my policy statement, you should buy bag cereal, right? So when we look at the way persuasive messages are created, they're usually in some type of ethos, logos, and pathos, and we are creating a message to motivate or change behavior towards whatever it is we're looking for. And that's the way fact, value, policy, propositions, and Aristotle's ethos, pathos, and logos are utilized in a rhetorical argument. Now, when we talk about science communication, obviously this can get muddled in identity and politics and belief structures, and there's all these different informations coming at us, and we want to think about whether we are the expert or the non-expert getting the message or the expert getting the message. This is why we want to be in a dialogue with the other person and utilizing uh, trustworthiness, competency, dynamism. We want to be connecting emotionally, empathetically, and being in dialogue with and regulating our emotions. We want to think about how are we presenting our logical reasoning. And then the last thing when we think about rhetoric is mythos. And mythos is incorporating cultural narratives. So there's ethos, pathos, and logos, which Aristotle established, but mythos is a cultural narrative that we can come around to establish and establish common ground, or as a bridge that we can use to find things that we can agree on. And depending on the controversialness of the topic, mythos can be a great way to develop a bridge to inform or persuade. So when if we're using mythos, those are references, either ideographs to talk about the political identity, like standing under one nation under God. We are here to protect our Constitution. Like these kind of messages might come through. It doesn't matter what political party you are, we are here as Americans, and this is what we want to see, that we all have this in common. Uh, we also might see mythos coming at us from through music, through iconic music or iconic stories. Wow, Big Bang Theory or Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, gaming, Minecraft or Mario Brothers. Like whenever you can find these pop culture reference points that we can use as a way to build a bridge to convey information through, that can often become a rhetorical technique called mythos. And it sounds like myth, but those are pop cultural references. We definitely, as we are looking at this, we want to think about, let me see in my notes here if I'm going to go over. I've got my notes that I'm going off of to get, because this information is complex. Even I get a little lost in it. Okay, so this is a good place for me when we're talking about finding common ground and rhetorical techniques, that we want to look at the use of analogies, figurative analogy, literal analogies, metaphors, synecdoches, and other linguistic, those are all linguistic tools, the ways we use language to convey meaning and to help us understand. So if I'm using a figurative analogy, well, and an analogy is a comparison. I'm going to compare this to this. And if I am trying to get some my scientific principle of, oh, we've done some research on the way traffic flows in this neighborhood here, and we have a school here, and this, and we've had problems with the flow of traffic. Uh, and I want to create a change that the city is going to spend money to change this intersection, which is a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of convincing for the budget to be allocated for this neighborhood to have a traffic, to change the way the traffic flows, that I might point to a literal or figurative analogy of a comparison to show, to help make the point clear. So if I were to use a literal analogy, I'm going to compare it to research done of a different city that had a similar traffic issue, and they did make the change, and this was the result, right? So we have, um, I'm going to go through, if I'm going through a literal analogy, I'm going to say this was the same, and this was the same, this was the same, this was the same. Okay, these things were different. And then, oh, they made this change, and we noticed this was the result that cleared up most of the problems, despite this one thing being different, it cleared up their problem. Now, if we take into account everything we had the same and we might have one thing different, we could expect to have similar results. That's a literal analogy of comparing this city's traffic issue to this other city's traffic issue. Now, if I were to do a figurative analogy, and I want to try and explain what is the issue going on with traffic, I might compare it to something that has absolutely nothing to do, maybe nothing to do with traffic at all. I'm going to talk about something completely different. And if you're an expert on this topic and you're talking to a non-expert audience, uh, this figurative analogy would be a great shortcut way to get them to understand your point. So maybe I'm going to talk about, maybe I'll talk about the flow, a kitchen and a family in a kitchen, and how the family in the morning, when everyone's getting ready to get school and everybody's on top of each other and everyone's running into each other, and we keep dropping things, and things are getting mixed up, and right, like there's all this congestion and clogging in the kitchen. So that would be a figurative analogy, that I'm comparing an actual traffic to a family in a kitchen, the traffic of family in the kitchen. And you can hear the metaphorical words that are being sprinkled in, so that it already is established that traffic is this kind of metaphor word that I'm using in my figurative analogy. Okay. Whew. That's one way to understand analogy. Like when we talk about metaphors, we're really talking about how words are used to help us understand an idea. Like if I want to talk about the okay, so neuroscientists, which I am not a neuroscientist, but when they talk about the mind and the functioning of the minds, they know the mind is not a computer. They know that there is no way to compare the way a computer works to the way the complexity of neurons, or other mechanical industrial processes, or even the neuroscience, neurons, the way neurons flow for memory or other processes, is nothing to do with traffic, but you'll hear those words being used to describe the mind at work and metaphorically gets sprinkled in like, oh my gosh, I don't have enough bandwidth to take in what you're saying. I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Or, wow, I'm on overload. I feel like that little spinning wheel on my computer and my mind is shutting down. Like even just saying shutting down as a way to talk about your mind, even though your mind is not shutting down, it's always processing, it's always working. There's nothing changed, but you have shut down. It might be, or uh, is your these words are just kind of sprinkled into our language. And definitely, yeah, since the Industrial Revolution, the mechanics, the way things function mechanically or computer processing, gets used in a lot of our different ways that we talk about a lot of different things. Okay. So those are other things to become aware of in the way that we're conveying information rhetorically and moving into that informative process versus persuasive process. When we have to speak to be, I'm checking my notes, when we have to speak to be persuasive, we want to really think about rhetoric as an invitation that, hey, I really need to get you to eat better, or I need you to be safer in the world, and this is the thing you need to do for that. Or we need a policy and we need a public health policy around this issue, that the really only way to persuade someone is through invitation. And that means that you need the participant, the other, to agree to the interaction. Either they are going to agree to the interaction by clicking on your video, by dialoguing with you. And that means that you need to be clear about your purpose. You need transparency in a dialogue. Hey, this is really important that I don't know if I can persuade you to do this, but I really want to tell you about why this is important, what I've learned about it that I think could make a difference. Like you need to establish a goal, you need to establish the relationship and the purpose and make it about yourself, um, and why you care about it. When we do that, we avoid manipulating, being passive aggressive, and or using our authority as a way to persuade, like, I am the authority, I have the information, and therefore I will get compliance. Like when we do an over reliance on authority, I'm the doctor. We know how frustrated we feel if we've been in an interaction with a doctor who came at with authority instead of dialogue and reciprocity. So to avoid that, let's say you're the reporter, you're the bridge person with the non-expert, or you need to let the authority, you need to represent the authority so that they are being represented authentically and not just dismissive. Oh, they're a doctor, so they, and then fall into those stereotypes, but really allow for a dialogue to happen with questions and concerns and the reciprocity of a back and forth interaction. The other really important thing is delivering ideas concisely and speaking from a place of brevity. And that goes back to not starting at ABC, relating enough to know where to start. It also means that you're using those analogies or their metaphors, or you're using the example of a small thing to talk about a bigger idea, because this might be too big. Let's just talk about getting to a micro piece, not the macro piece. Um, the challenges with brevity when you're the expert is you just know too much, right? You know too much, you know the nuance, you know all the exceptions, you know that there is still research being done, that we're never really at a fully point of knowledge. We're always changing as we get better technology, as we get better scientific, evidential methods for understanding. We are in a constant world of discovery. So the nuance of that means we have a lot, we're coming into the conversation with so much context. So then I ask you to be brief, and you're like, no, I can't be. This topic is this big. Um, so yes, I want to acknowledge the frustration of that. Uh, And I want to explain the importance of dialogue and how to come at information in smaller pieces for the audience. And then you might move more into a back and forth where you're on the same team and you're working together. And then the more trust and dialogue and relating you build, then you can start expanding your information and getting in that context. And you don't have to rely so much on brevity. But in the beginning, as a gentle startup, knowing how to use these these rhetorical tools, inviting in, using analogies, and building common ground. We want to recognize that we're dealing with a lot of distractions, and uh, I don't always just want to say short attention spans, because I think people, when they care about a topic, they don't have a short attention span. But not but, and I feel like just saying someone has a short attention span is really dismissive of something more important, that we are living in a world of constant distractions and busyness and demands on our time. And so speaking with brevity can engage in a really just engage your audience in a way till we can expand and you get the passion that wants them to consume more of the information. So you need those strategies for building and maintaining interest through linguistics and other tools. So know your audience, enter into those dialogues, tailor those persuasive messages, and really think about, can you be more informative instead of persuasive? And then if you can develop trust through just having information without asking the other person to change, you can ask for things bigger when it comes up. Or you can be an ambassador for why I am doing it this way. And as Gandhi says, be the change uh, that you wish to see. You know, if you want people to be better listeners, then be a better listener. If you don't want people to do defensive listening or attack identities or stereotype you, then be the change and don't do those behaviors, or become aware of when you fall into those traps and work on when you know better, do better. Oh, that is a lot of information, and it goes with a lot of what we've been talking about. We've already been building our techniques about storytelling, which fits right into here as a rhetorical idea through the way we convey information. We want to think about this lecture as a really pivotal lecture for how we're moving forward in the weeks ahead, and the assignments I'm asking you to do to dialogue about science communication. All right. So my call to action in my message is to think about how you can improve your communication skills and build your communication competency. All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm looking forward to more with you as we move forward. Bye bye.